Welcome everyone to today's webinar, the third in our series. And today we're looking at increasing Indigenous Australians' representation in professional technical roles in the mining industry. My name is Val Madsen and I'll be chairing our panel today. Firstly, it's my privilege and honour to do the acknowledgement to country. So I begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners who host mining operations on their land. We recognise that all traditional owners have a special relationship with the lands and culture. We also recognise that mining has a mixed history on those lands and waters, which makes the topic we're discussing today all the more important. While mining can have the potential to be a great catalyst for economic and social uplift of host communities, we can also achieve this shared objective by starting at respect for the 65,000-year-old living culture which calls Australia home. Once again, I'd like to sincerely acknowledge all traditional owners, including their elders past, present and emerging, who host mining operations on their traditional lands. And today we are inviting all our attendees to post up the name of the country from where you're dialing in from. And you can do that through our chat function in the middle of the bottom of your screen. And you'll note that all of the speakers today have also acknowledged the countries that we're representing from. Firstly, just a little bit of background on the industry of choice framework. You would have heard me mention that in terms of the introduction. And the framework itself was launched by MCA in 2021. And really the aim of that framework is about positioning and promoting this industry to all our partners, employees, employers, the full supply chain, our communities, and it really is about positioning the industry to be one that people choose to work with and for. And that's really about ensuring that we have the broadest possible talent pool. Since the launch, of course, we've had two webinars, the first on inclusive leadership and the second, again, on inclusive workplaces, but we really narrowed down and looked at removing obstacles for people with disability. And today's topic, again, has been selected specifically to focus on professional technical roles in the industry for Indigenous Australians. We know, of course, that many companies are seeking to increase the representation of Indigenous Australians in their workforce, and that includes site-based roles, corporate head office roles. But certainly what we do know is that there's a significant underrepresentation of Indigenous Australians in professional technical roles. And some examples are IT, commerce, law, geology, metallurgy, and to name a few. The other area of underrepresentation, of course, is in the executive and board type roles. So before I introduce our panel, just a couple of points on today's agenda. We are recording the event and you can find the link on the MCA website and also on the MCA's YouTube channel. We've got a number of questions for our panel, but we invite questions from the audience as well. Please post those up into the chat, and if we have time, we'll certainly cover them. Lastly, after today's webinar, we'll be sending you a short survey link, and we really do appreciate your feedback. So to maximise our time today, I'm going to keep the introductions very brief, but please, on our website, you can look for more detailed information on each of our speakers. Firstly, I'd love to present and welcome Professor Martin Nakada. Martin is Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Education and Strategy at James Cook University. He's a leading Indigenous academic in Australia and in fact the first Torres Strait Islander to graduate with a PhD. His current research includes 2 longitudinal studies of the academic preparation of Indigenous students for Indigenous studies and the academic performance of Indigenous school students in math and science. Secondly, I'd love to welcome Brad Welch. Brad is from the Murri tribe in northwestern New South Wales. Brad was appointed Chief Executive and Managing Director of ERA in February this year. Prior to this, Brad has held a number of senior roles at Rio Tinto, including Chief Advisor Closure Strategy, Non-Managed Assets, and Chief Advisor to the CEO on Indigenous Affairs. And I'd love to introduce you today to Associate Professor Jay Phillips. Jay is from the Waka Waka country in the southeast of Queensland. Jay is head of the School of Indigenous Australian Studies at Charles Sturt University and also chair of the university's Indigenous Board of Studies. She leads a diverse team of educators that each year teach over 3,000 Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, as well as 200 students on campus. Let's begin. So to start, I'd like to ask each of the panel members a question. I'm going to start today with you, Martin, if that's okay.
Yep.
We know that the majority of the professional technical roles have a base in STEM. And certainly, as you know, Indigenous Australians are underrepresented. What do you think can be done to improve that STEM participation and completion? And how far back in the student experience do we really need to go? Thank you, Martin.
Well, yes, they are. And as the mining industry well knows, as we innovate towards the new technologies these days, we're going to have a whole lot more new demands as well coming through for the industry. And that will set the course for much higher numbers than what we're seeking to do today. And so what can be done? Well, lots. For me, the work has been mostly in the education field. And for me also, not just the university sector, but the schools, as they are the pipeline for the kind of work that we need to do to prepare graduates for the future. But they need a hand, and I'll just slide through a couple of slides here to show you why they need a hand. And this is a graph from the international PISA data, which counts up the results of kids across several countries. And here's Australia's scorecard, and you can see the trends in the maths and science has been on a downward trend for some years now. The bottom orange line is really where the Indigenous kids are. So we're well below that in relation to the kind of journeys we need to undertake to try and rectify a situation. When you drill down to the national NAPLAN results, you can see this at the level of numeracy that from the earliest years down the bottom here, at year 3, we're well below those when compared to other Australians. And from the get-go, from year 3, we're often situated around 2-3 years behind everybody else. And what this means is that we carry forward into the upper years. So once they come into year 7, we can see that when the kids get to year 7, and if they're already failing on the bottom line of the orange line, they will never catch up. If they're just passing on the blue line, they won't make it. And similarly for science, we can see the same kind of trends there. So the kind of grades that we should be aspiring for Indigenous kids needs to be up into the AB levels of grades for them to be participating in the maths and sciences that would convert into jobs, studies, and then jobs into the industry. The worry that we've got in the school system is this decline in numbers, and this is just a grab out of one school we're working with. You know, they start here with 60 kids in year 7, and by the time they hit year 10, the cohort is down to under 20. So we're not only failing kids early, but we're losing numbers coming through to year 10. And of course, the carry through to year 12 is a great concern for us. So essentially, there are 2 main issues that face us in the task of getting graduates for the industry. We've got to deal with the reduced capacity issues, and we've got to deal with the reduced numbers. Just to highlight what that means when it gets up to the undergraduate space, here's a graph from just the far north Queensland area. You can see down here that we're only getting a trickle through from year 10 into year 12, and the year 12 completers for this year in 2021 that the data comes from. There were only 33 in far north Queensland, and that went on to university. And that's about 0.25% of the cohort that actually is in the system. So we're not doing so great. And when we see the trickle that comes through to university and they convert into undergraduate enrollments, we get even a smaller trickle coming through to places like engineering. And what we've been doing over recent years is working on how to convert those small numbers we get into graduates. And so we've been able to lift the completion rate and the pass-fail rate of kids up to now this year's numbers. They're now completing and passing courses at 87%. So we've worked a way to convert underprepared kids through degree programs, and we are now graduating them at a higher rate. The thing that is really holding us back, though, and we control for a whole lot of things, so it's a lot of socio-emotional, psychosocial elements, including material resources. So the two that are holding us back here, this one is finances, and the other one is the resources. And they're the two key things that plague our efforts to try and graduate numbers. So for us, really, the key issue is being with building the right sets of capability skills for the new world of the mining industry. But we also have a major issue with the low numbers, and we have a major issue with the resourcing that kids have access to that enables them to participate in university. Thanks, Val.
Thank you, Martin. That's great. So you've really given us a good picture. Even these were snippets of certain states. So clearly the issue is starting in the primary school, and then it's obviously those numbers are decreasing. But thank you, because there are two areas that the resourcing and the finances, as you say, that work could be done. Brad, if I could turn to you, you've certainly got a fascinating career story. I think you did your early school years in Redfern, in Sydney, New South Wales. You've got a master's in mining engineering. You've got a degree in law. You've got a degree in welfare. And certainly, you know, and now your role given all that we've heard from Martin, what are the top 3 things that the Australian mining industry should do to immediately improve this representation in professional technical roles?
Yeah, thanks Val, and thanks Professor Nakata and Jay. Acknowledgement to Jay as well on the panel. Look, I do remember growing up in Redfern. We grew up very much with our leaders and our elders in a really, really strong kind of rights framework and a self-determination framework, and this fundamental idea that we had the right to reach our full potential. So, you know, you've got the right to achieve your full potential, and that your full potential actually is shaping the kind of the nation's social and economic fabric. So that's kind of the basis of, you know, how I kind of grew up. I guess I'm probably about 12 or 13 years into my journey in mining, and I've made a couple of different kind of career moves, you know, different industries. One of the things I've kind of found in mining is one of the hardest things to kind of deal with is the low expectations of Indigenous talent. You know, being deployed to the Indigenous affairs area, being deployed to the communities, being kind of, you know, effectively. So I think the mining industry really kind of, you know, needs to grapple with this idea that Indigenous talent, I guess, is more than, you know, someone who can go out and explain to the community what you're doing. The other narrative that's emerged in the mining industry, which I think needs to be really, really challenged, is this idea that an entry-level operator or a trade or an entry-level apprentice can somehow become a general manager. And I think we underestimate how hard that transition actually is. And if we think about what a general manager does and how you become a general manager, generally you've got, I mean, in my case, kind of three degrees, but at least 1 degree, if not 2 degrees. You've generally worked on a number of different sites. You've generally kind of understood a number of different commodities, ore bodies. You know, you've even in a functional area as a general manager, you've kind of, so there's this fundamental kind of shape of a general manager that's not going to be filled by you know, an entry-level operator. And so I think we really need to understand that gap, and we really need to focus on filling that gap. And effectively, if we do entertain the idea that an operator or a trade can become a general manager, and I think there's some truth to that, we're talking about 20 years. And so are we prepared to wait 20 years to get general managers? Or, you know, that's an unacceptable position for the mining industry. And so it kind of made me think, well, why do we even want Indigenous leadership? What's the reason that you want Indigenous leadership in mining, right? What difference does an Indigenous leader bring in a professional skill set or a leader's skill set? And if you picture where mining's at today, we have a fundamental challenge. Our future is far different than our past. And in the past, we could actually rely on the state or the federal government to overrule a host community. It didn't matter what kind of background they had in the state or national interests, and a mine could be opened. And I guess a lot of the energy was devoted to the kind of state and federal government. And I think we're finding right now that host communities' interests are not only equal to, if not they're the primary interests that actually unlock a mine, right? And so the mining industry has to understand the cultural landscape in which they're going into. And that's, you know, the next phase of mining. And I guess I'd encourage everyone on the call not to look at this as a social investment or the right thing to do, or like our business and our business growth relies on being able to navigate and understand and grow these communities' cultural landscapes. You know, our future is very different than our past. So, you know, if we think about what is a cultural landscape, and one of the things I would encourage everyone to not do is think that Indigenous people or Aboriginal people are the sum of our heritage artifacts, because we go and walk the land and we find the rocks and we find the artwork and we find, but it's only a very, very small picture of the cultural landscape. And you know, Professor Nakatai is talking about a part of the cultural landscape that we need to grow. We need to grow Indigenous professionals, engineers. And so our cultural landscape is actually a really modern thing. It's informed by a 65,000-year-old heritage, but it's actually a really modern thing. And so we really need to kind of make sure that we understand the landscapes we're going into and think about the positives. I mean, we bring multi-billion-dollar intergenerational investments into communities that do not have an alternative investment. There's not a Google trying to build a warehouse. There's not a commercial tower being built. And so these investments have the fundamental opportunity to change the course of that cultural landscape for the better. But we have to understand it. So I think, you know, for me, I was thinking about what would be the first thing that I'd do, and am I prepared to wait 20 years for an Indigenous manager, an Indigenous general manager? And I'm not. As we stand today, there are at least 40,000 Indigenous people in Australia that hold a bachelor degree or higher, at least. And it seems to me that those people have navigated an incredibly difficult, you know, they've broken the barriers, they've gone through the university, they've in most cases left their communities, and they've been able to grapple this kind of modern world with this really historical kind of high context culture. Why are we targeting them? What do we need to do to get an Indigenous nurse today or an Indigenous teacher? They're not choosing the mining industry. That's the fundamental challenge. So what are we doing to get the 40,000 people? We only need 1,000 of them. We don't need everyone to choose us. We don't. And I can promise you, it is far easier to teach an Indigenous professional mining concepts like net present value, return on capital employed, effective utilisation, you know, all of the things that we use to measure leadership and the mining progress, than it is to teach a non-Indigenous professional a 65,000-year-old high context culture. I can promise you that. So I think the first thing that anyone should be doing is going and looking for the talent. The place I would say you should start, and we found this actually, we were hunting in the wrong pools. So we went and looked at universities that had a really strong STEM background or a really strong engineering background, and generally not a good background of recruiting Indigenous students. So talking to universities that were successful at recruiting Indigenous students gave us a much bigger pool, and then converting those students into mining disciplines was easier, as well as connecting with the alumni of those organisations in order to try and get the talent. then you've got to have a very clear pathway of how do you help them transition into the mining industry, and what do you need to do to kind of support them. So the second thing that we focus on, and the second thing I'd encourage everyone to do, is establish a two-way mentoring program. So the most senior leaders in your business connected with the best and brightest talent of Indigenous employees. And I just want to emphasize two-way mentoring just for one moment. We tend to think the mentoring is for the Indigenous employee, and it absolutely is. It allows an Indigenous employee to understand what a senior leader's role is, what they do, how they work, that they're human. But if you're a senior leader, understanding what it's like to be an Indigenous employee in this mining game, and your competitive advantage actually sits in understanding those communities, you should be as ambitious about learning as the Indigenous employee. Because when you go for that next job, or when you try to unlock that next resource, it might actually give you that edge that others don't have. So I think we've approached these questions in a very social way, and I'm not discounting for a moment that social is not important, I'm not discounting that at all, but our economic interests are aligned. We need to drive this in order to drive the future of mining. And so you have to get it into the core. You have to get it into the core of your business. And that two-way mentoring is incredibly valuable, because you have senior leaders having a connection with the Indigenous talent in your business, which not only gives you insights into where that talent kind of works and what their life's like and what their community is like, but actually starts to get you that edge, in terms of where we're going as an industry. Look, and I think the third thing I'd encourage the industry to do is you have to have a cultural connection or a cultural awareness program, and it has to, at the very, very least, explain the last 200 years of history. Because unfortunately, the generation of leaders we have today went through school where they just weren't taught that information. And it's very difficult to engage with a community without understanding what is relatively modern history. And so it doesn't have to be, days and days long, but very hard for a mining industry to unlock the full potential of a host community without at least a basic level of that modern history, and I guess its impact on the communities. So but look, I'm positive about the future. I'm optimistic. I think the next generation will be phenomenal. And every single person on this call and every single person who is curious about this has the chance to change the future. And remember, our future is different than our past. So thanks, Val. Really great question.
Yeah, Brad, that's great. I love the way you finished that. Our future is very different to our past. And thank you for challenging us with the why question. As we know, that's so important. It's the why. And you've given us some really practical things there for companies to take away. I think there is untapped talent, and it's there. And you've given us some ways that we can access and attract that. But then the retaining of that talent with the mentoring and the cultural awareness. So very pragmatic. Thank you so much. Now, again, just a reminder to everyone, if you've got a pressing question, please pop it into the chat. I'm keeping an eye on that. So we'll certainly look at your questions. But Jay, just hearing from Martin and Brad, certainly with, you lead a team of educators there at the university, teaching thousands of students. And one of those programs, of course, is the cultural competency training. I'm interested in what you see are the major changes and successes that you're seeing, particularly for students after they're undertaking these courses.
Thanks, Val, for that introductory question. And thanks, Martin and Brad, for your presentations. I was reflecting on what you were saying, and there's such an interconnection between how institutions in this country need to shift their thinking in order to respond to all those complexities. Several years ago, just thinking about the pipeline or the pathway into STEM programs, Martin, about 7 years ago, there was a national research project done with over 200 schools on this in Australia, from very remote schools to metropolitan schools, that found that when the proportion of Indigenous students in a school that's primary or secondary reached 15%, teachers and schools focused on pathways into vocations or other non-educational pathways. So I think that all of us have an opportunity, definitely, but also a challenge to consider our institutions, whether it's the mining industry or whether it's primary, secondary or compulsory schooling, and for us in universities to really reform how we approach this difficulty. And I really appreciate, Brad, what you have said, that it is about reducing our reliance, or non-Indigenous people's reliance generally, on deficit discourses to build a foundation for relationship with and partnership with Indigenous peoples and communities. And you know, the hardest thing is to deal with low expectations of talent and Indigenous peoples. And that's not going to occur by constantly providing information about what we do, why we do it as Aboriginal people, when we did it, and what kind of issues exist in our communities. It needs to be a partnership, and relationships are founded on an understanding that each party brings to the fore. So that wasn't how I was planning to start, but it was just really interesting to kind of see that sort of looking at it holistically. So I want to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people, the nation upon whose land I'm speaking from today, and I've been here for 7 years. I was born and raised in a small country town, very small, 2,500 people, in Gayndah, southeast Queensland. That's the land of the Waka Waka people. And my family also bears unbroken lineage to the Gureng peoples. So that's around Bundaberg, Mundubra, Monto. The first invasion or encroachment by white people onto Waka Waka country occurred in around 1842, and the town I grew up in, Gayndah, was gazetted in 1852. My grandmother's father was born in 1873, and my grandmother's mother was born in 1880. My great-grandmother's mother was born around the time that first white people invaded my country. And, you know, Molly Jones, who was my great-grandmother, was a skilled rider and stockwoman. And we have a photo of her sitting high on a horse with her Akubra hat, working the country, you know, a country that for many, in my experience, ignore that history and tend to frame Aboriginal peoples as being an impediment to building Australia, rather than having major contributions to what we do today as a country, the institutions, the very wealth, especially wealth of this country, including that which is gained from mining, but also on my country in Waka Waka, sheep, cattle, and now citrus. In April 2022, I think this is another issue for the mining industry and, you know, associate organisations to consider, is that there are more and more native title claims being determined by the federal government. So in April 2022, my mob were successful in a claim for native title over, I think it was about 318,000 hectares of land where I'm from, and that's only half that was claimed. In Queensland, there's 30% of the country at the moment that has been determined to have native title, and there's almost an equal amount still within the courts being fought by, you know, local nations. So that kind of, when you think about partnerships between the mining industry and communities, you need to think about the kind of relationship that you need to establish in order to do the negotiations with native title holders. So not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, people who hold native title, who will come to any negotiation or partnership with a very high expectation, and will be able to express their perspectives, their views, and what they expect from the mining industry on the basis of holding that title. So after sharing, that very potted history of my connection to country, I'd like people in the call to actually think about what your connection to the country that you're calling from is. And, if you're up to it, put it in the chat box. Because from the way in which we teach, we've got 3,000 students that we teach in 11 subjects that we fully develop in my school and own. In addition to that, we've got 1,500 students that we teach in what we call hybrid subjects, which are co-designed with other disciplines in the university, including allied health, law, justice, management, environmental science, education. I think that's the extent of it. And on that note, I just want to say welcome to 3 of my colleagues who are also in this call, Nick, Kirsten and Peter. So if you would like to respond to any of the chat questions, hopefully there will be some, as I try to finish now in 2.5 minutes, that come up about the approach that we take. So fundamentally, we do not develop our curriculum to teach anyone about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander experiences. Our fundamental principle is that what we're teaching is Australian history and the contemporary frameworks for Australians that are actually possible because of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but also through colonisation. And it's that lens of colonisation that puts the onus on non-Indigenous peoples who make decisions about how to increase the representation of Indigenous people in their organisations to deconstruct the role that their profession and their industry has played in previous inequality, but also in keeping the story, the myth going that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples were just an impediment that were easily overcome to the colonisation of this country. And, as Brad said, we have made contributions now. We have skills, very well educated, value education, and that's the very, very start of where non-Indigenous people and perhaps, others also to actually consider what kind of relationship you're going to develop in order to increase representation. So a partnership is a relationship. And as I said, I think I said, a relationship means that all parties coming in to form a new relational framework for dealing with new issues that will arise as we move forward into the future need to really understand where they're coming from. So in teaching and learning in the way in which we teach, we know that there is no norm. We cannot teach about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as though there's a homogenous experience culturally, historically, socially, economically, and in relation to native title holdings as well. So the first step is always for the industry itself to deconstruct its own assumptions about itself in relation to not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but the institutions and its relationship and its ongoing contribution and participation to colonisation in this country. There was a lot more I want to say, but I'll do it in response to the next question.
Thank you, Jay. That niches really nicely to what Brad has talked about in terms of our future is very different to our past, the criticality of the partnership, the relationship. So thank you so much for that. If I can come back to you, Martin, I know that many of the members of the Minerals Council of Australia over a number of years now have talked about the challenge in terms of particular occupations, and engineering is one. The shortage of mining engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and certainly some statistics we have here from the Department of Education indicates that there's around 600 students who identify as Indigenous Australians studying engineering and related technologies, great that we've got the 40,000 graduates, but that's a very small number in terms of an area where we're really, it's certainly a shortage of talent. And I understand many companies are looking offshore now to bring in that skill set. You've alluded to the challenge earlier in your opening response. We talked about the lack of finances and resources. And interestingly, we've had a very interesting comment from the attendees, and that's around the digital divide, and that much is talked about that being digital literacy or interest, whereas in effect, it's probably more the ICT infrastructure and hardware and stable connections. So it'd be good to hear from you, from your perspective, how big is this challenge in one, attracting Indigenous Australians into engineering and related technology studies, and what would it take to see a meaningful increase? Sorry, Matt. Yep.
Is that better? Thanks, Val. Yes, this is a really big challenge for us, and what we've been doing over the recent years is working on two particular areas. That is, the underpreparedness of students who are coming into university, and the work that we need to do is to get the pipeline fixed so that we can get the maths and science capabilities forward. So they're the two big issues for us, and has been for a number of years now. Let me just share with you the work that we've been doing in the higher ed sector. As Brad says, we've got a lot of graduates, but we've got currently in the system more than 20,000 students right across the sector in undergraduate and postgraduate studies. So these figures from the HEAMS data set, they have a 2-year lag. And so I would imagine by growing that 1,000 a year, we're way above 20,000 students right this moment. Sadly, though, the thin slices are the STEM areas, as we well know, and that's because of the capability issues that's not coming from the schools. And the other issue we have is that because we have not had the requisite ATAR scores to get into our chosen degree programs, we've allowed other means of entry into the university. And that means that we've got about 80% of our kids who are enrolling into undergraduate courses without the requisite ATAR scores. So that means for Indigenous centres like mine and like Jay's in Charles Sturt, we've got to do heavy lifting to make up for the underpreparedness that's coming through to us. So over the years, universities have generally struggled with this, and across the sector, across all degrees, all years, we've only managed to get just below 30% completion rates because of the situation we've found ourselves. We've got poor capabilities coming through. We've got an entry process that invites a lot of people into the higher ed space, and we set them up to fail. And so this is a scorecard from 2005, and as you can see, the success rate is below 30%. We've done some very serious work here at James Cook University to try and pick up on this underpreparedness. We've built in, some science around how you develop academic persistence with students. We've trialed that in 2 universities over 2 5-year case studies. And we've now been just finished the last case study, and I just want to show you the results from that last case study. And this is how you build learners who are not prepared for the university sector. And this is our pass-fail rate from the last decade or so. And right here around 2016 is when we picked it up and started the second 5-year case study. And you can see in the following year, the average pass-fail rate is the dark blue line, starting to trend up. We can see what's happening on the other lines in first year, second year, third year, but largely we've been able to lift that because these kids may not have the right preparation, but they're not stupid. We just have to find a way as educators to actually tap science and other kind of research knowledge to build the right learning support agenda so we can get them through their courses. And so we've done so well with this. We've been able, in the recent years, in 4 years, we've been able to close the gap at the second year level. We still got a ways to go at third year level and ways to go at 5 year, but we can't fix that if we can't fix the front end, because that's what's coming in from the schools. But nonetheless, we've done some serious work there now that we're now moved up from 12th in the country in terms of completion rates. We're now at 4th. So we've been able to move the dial on performance areas, and we're now completing kids at much higher rates. So it's double the graduation rates we had 4 years ago. So that's how quickly we can pick this up. Today, just to give you a scorecard on our work here at James Cook University, we're now that we measure things now on pass-fail rate, and the current pass rate now is 75%. Again, these kids, although they've had a bad experience coming into the uni, doesn't make them stupid. So we just got to find a way. And for the school sector, this is the work we've been doing in the school sector. We've kind of understood the capabilities needing to get into engineering and science and IT areas, into education to law. And we've mapped that all the way back into the school system to understand how it is that we need to be building these capabilities by increments from each year level all the way back to preschool. We studied the Australian Curriculum Authority's work in this area, and we understand this in detail. And we spent just 2 years studying how these things are being built, what they're getting kids to gain knowledge on, and when in their year levels, and what are the kind of main concepts they actually are wanting the kids to actually have going through the years. We've studied the ways that it's being interpreted in the Queensland area, in the Queensland jurisdiction, particularly through the QCAA areas, which is the curriculum authority areas. And what we've done over the years now is understood the national achievement standards and its content descriptors and its strands and sub-strands of the disciplines. And we've coded every achievement standard in the curriculum. And then we've also rewritten a lot of their summative assessment profiles so that it can help teachers to understand the translation of the areas of competencies need to be built in the national standard and how that's actually interpreted by the state and how the schools need to actually, so there's a consistency of interpretations to the national standards. We coded all of that, as I said, and now we've gotten to a place where we actually understand what it is that contribute to the kind of a knowledge that we have about kids' performance in these areas. So here we've got a result from a year 10 kid, for example, and we also know when they get good grades, whether it actually prepares them well for this is particularly in maths, going through to 11 and 12. So if they're doing well in the previous years, and the curriculum has been designed to build the threads of capacities, and we built that all the way through, and they get to year 10 and they're achieving on a green level, we know that'll prepare them well for 11 and 12. When they hit an orange color, we can now study the threads backwards, and we can find where the issues are. And here they missed the whole year in teaching that concept. And here they were in year 10 trying to test it. And of course, the kid didn't get it, but there was a 12-month absence of teaching in that particular achievement standard. So now, of course, as you would well know, where it doesn't work is where there's no thread. And so there are curriculum issues, there's design issues, there's organizational issues about the translation of the achievement standards into classrooms, schools, and then into classroom practices. And if they're not designed well, we will set up the kids to fail. Yeah. So again, it doesn't mean the kids are stupid. What we need to be doing is looking at our profession to ask very critical questions about how we're actually designing the instruction and how we're actually planning the learning engagement so that capacity is built at every increment and not fail them before they get too far down the track. So from that work, we've been able to diagnose exactly where the issues are with the students are, so that teachers now actually have much more student knowledge about not just where they fell over, but what content descriptor, what achievement level, what strand of math was this that happened. So they now can actually have a very astute way to actually diagnose where the issues are and remediate them. And from the trials that we've been doing now, we've got the last 3 years of data to show you where they've actually applied our maths framework. They're actually above the 8-year trend line, sorry, the 9-year trend line that we've got there. Where they chose to do their own science in English, which we benchmarked with, they actually went south of the last 3 years. So we are actually turning the performance style on math. And we've also done this work with science, but they chose not to use it. So here's the result from the last 3 years for 16 of the most remote community schools with high first language presence in the student cohort, and yet we were still able to move the dial on math. So I'll leave it at that, Val, for until the next question.
Thank you, Martin. I think that's it certainly highlights, I think, what educators might even call the scaffolding, the build. And once, you know, you lose that concept, it's so great that the university is being able to work with the Australian curriculum and getting it right in the primary schools, so critically important. Brad, you know, now thinking about the workplace, certainly there are some of the employees in this industry that are saying, look, we've got relatively good representation in our on-site roles, particularly in trades and operator type roles. Where we're not seeing the numbers is in a corporate office. You know, what action, you've mentioned a few things that we could be doing holistically as an industry, but is there something around inclusiveness or what is it that you think we could be doing to better attract to those corporate type roles? Yeah,
thank you. It's a good question. I guess in my own experience, I was a bit of a late bloomer. I did a Masters of Mining Engineering actually after I joined Rio. Big shout out to UNSW School of Mining. You got me there. I probably wasn't your best prospect, I got to say. But so look, really, I guess what I would say is you can get an Indigenous professional. In this case, law has one of the strongest representations of Indigenous professionals in the country, and you know, and you can get them into, in my case at least, a Masters of Mining Engineering or a mining engineering degree, and I do think that complements the students that are coming through and talking about the importance of engineering. I mean, you can only be what you can only see, right? So I think we really need our fundamental challenge is we need to get senior Indigenous leaders in other industries and government right now working in mining. That's our fundamental challenge, because we need that senior leadership representation in order to drive us forward. And we have to also make sure that we're building an environment that's conducive to them being senior Indigenous leaders of their profession, because it's catastrophic to teach them how to be non-Indigenous leaders and walk and talk and act the same as non-Indigenous leaders, because what we're chasing is the cultural knowledge. What we're chasing is, and we want them to be the best mine planner. You know, I mean, one of the examples I use is we often get the communities team to walk out to the community with the mine plan to explain its impacts, right? But we do nothing to get an Indigenous mine planner to deal with the parts of the mine plan that impact the community. And how much more powerful would it be if we actually fix the mine plan in order to get more tons and deal with the issues that are in with the community, rather than let the communities team traipse out there and explain the impact, you know? So I think in terms of professional representation, I 100% support to the university students coming through, and they've probably got more fortitude and smarts than I ever did. So I bow to them. But I do also think that capturing Indigenous professionals that are in the network, that have navigated this and are very honed leaders in their own right, they've generally hit an Indigenous ceiling in where they're working, whether that's government, whether that's kind of other corporates. You can be their chance, right? You can grow them, you can challenge them, they can come to your industry and they can actually grow your competitive advantage. So I just make sure you're targeting some of those honed leaders, and you're giving them that mining engineering or that, you know, that engineering or that you know, the other disciplines that we need. So I think that complements, but I think that's one of the biggest drivers.
Thanks, Brad. And as you say, it's really flipping our current approach on its head and allowing the senior Indigenous leaders to be their authentic leadership selves and not trying to change that. Jay, you know, hearing about industries in particular that are doing well in this space, certainly with some of the programs you're overseeing there, you know, we're seeing lots of good work happening in that social science and justice sectors. You know, what are those industries and sectors doing that, you know, they're doing well? And what are some of the lessons we could take from that for mining?
A really challenging question, because when we think about progress of institutions, organisations and industries, it's not a linear process. I think the biggest challenge is, what do current non-Indigenous leaders in the space, wherever it is, whether it's health or education, which are typically seen as, you know, ripe for integration of social justice perspectives, but also mining industry, also, you know, even animal science, agriculture, all of those industries require a step back, but they've also got a comfort zone where if things get too challenging, the default is to go back to what people know. So those common sense understandings of non-Indigenous leaders presently who are in this call, or with whom you speak, communicate, negotiate with on a daily basis, you know, those individuals need to actually deconstruct not only the institution, but their own understandings about their relationship to Australian history, the privileges that have been at history on the backs of non-Indigenous peoples in this country, what impact that will have on relationship building, and more particularly, what someone who you've targeted or you've headhunted as an Indigenous leader to come into your organisation is going to meet. So I think representation is not just about getting someone through the door. Representation means that once people are inside in that space, that the battle, you know, doesn't just begin again because of the lack of critical reflexivity of institutions and the individuals who make up those institutions. So the question about, you know, who's doing it well, I don't have an answer. I can't list off, because of that, default back to, you know, unhealthy, but very easy ways of operating for non-Indigenous people in these spaces. I can provide a general answer. I think the industries and sectors that do well actually acknowledge the histories of their professions and in Aboriginal people, but also on Aboriginal people's countries, and see themselves as an institutional mechanism of colonisation still. And colonisation is not just a description of a process. The more you dig into it, the more you find about the privilege that's bestowed on you, if you're non-Indigenous particularly, but for some non-Indigenous peoples as well, because institutions do tend to choose leaders that are more palatable, I think, to the organisation's goals. And present company excluded. So, you know, there's a real sort of challenge there for the organisation to understand that what they're looking for, and this goes well back to Brad's point, what they're looking for their organisation might be very, very different to what an Indigenous leader is looking for in an organisation that will assist in self-determination for their communities, or more broadly for all Indigenous peoples, you know, eventually. So in terms of what we do to prepare professionals, and in addition to the hybrid subjects that I mentioned before, we also do teach foundation subjects for every single program in this university. So That's around 58 courses, 99% currently in our undergraduate courses go through the subjects that we teach. And we've just started on integrating that policy to masters and postgrad courses. And the next level will be into research. So what we do, we prepare students for the profession in order to actually arise to that challenge, to be able to feel comfort with the challenges of critical self-inquiry, to understand privilege, to move away from this assumption that privilege equals economic wealth, that privilege exists in many different forms, and most of those forms that impact on Indigenous people are a product of colonisation and settler colonialism in the present. And, you know, the critical reflection, the question of what do you know? Where do you know it from? You know, why do you actually hold what you know to be true? Not only about Indigenous peoples, but about yourselves as an organisation, yourselves as leaders in an industry for which many hold assumptions. Like, I hold assumptions about the mining industry, and I need to challenge myself. So if we were doing a co-design, for example, in what might work for training for the mining industry, that there are challenges that I need to meet to understand what my assumptions are in relation also to the assumptions that are coming from individuals and leaders in organisations within your network. And the co-design model is really important. As I said before, there's no generic, there's no one-shot way for people to be able to understand what our histories today have created in terms of privilege and disadvantage, what it's created in terms of the misconceptions about the strength, the resilience, and the ability of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to maintain a connection to country when policies and guns and, you know, and there's centuries of it have actually just have been designed to disconnect us, not just from country, from our families as well. So turning around, you know, what you said, what you described with Brad's comment, flipping it around is always something that you as leaders in this organisation will need to be prepared to do. So a really good example, briefly, just to finish off, we've got one more minute, but an example, we've got the graduate certificate in Wiradjuri language, culture and heritage. It is an excellent example of a relationship that spans 20 years. It's a co-governed course. It's designed to reintegrate, you know, teach Wiradjuri language, but also to bring people back to their country for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And I think that co-governing aspect is the key to it, plus the longevity, meeting the challenges over 20 years, working with Dr. Uncle Stan Grant Senior, AM, who's just won a Lifetime Achievement Award at the latest NAIDOC and the latest NAIDOC week. So there's strength on both sides in order to keep moving forward and to stop that rubber band defaulting those in power back to a comforting position.
Thank you, Jay. I think the challenge there for us is, again, let's reflect on our own assumptions as employers, as leaders, as executives, as board members, as an industry. And what I do take from that, building on the suggestion of Brad earlier around the cultural awareness programs, making sure that we're teaching the last 200 years of history. And to add on that, I think your point there, acknowledging the Indigenous in these professions, in the mining professions, they've been part of that, and the history in there, I think is really critical. It's been a fantastic discussion today. I want to sincerely thank all three of you for your insights. This has been really pragmatic. I know as a member of MCA, I've got some things that we can do as a company, and I hope that the industry has taken your insights and reflections and apply them. So as you say, Brad, we're not going to wait 20 years to turn this around. We need to take action today. We need to question our assumptions. We need to start with primary school education, as Martin has identified, to ensure that we get more people in these professions and out in our workforces. I want to thank each and every one of you. Thank you so much for all our attendees. We will be sending you a link to the recording and also to a short survey getting your feedback. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.